The sky above the alien marketplace was a deep glowing red, and the air was filled with the smell of strange fruits and spices that drifted through the narrow streets. Lyra, a small alien girl with pale blue skin and wide silver eyes, hid behind a stall stacked high with green crystal-like fruit. Her small hands clutched the edge of the counter as she peeked out at the crowd, her thin frame trembling with fear. Around her the market was alive with voices and movement, but the people avoided looking in her direction. Some whispered in low tones about a dangerous creature that had entered the market. The sound of heavy boots on the stone street grew louder, and the crowd shifted as a tall figure walked in. The figure was a human, wearing a dusty survival suit that covered him from neck to boots. A dark visor hid his face. The strange sight made the alien merchants lean back from their stalls, their eyes wary. At his side moved a small machine shaped like a dog, its metal body gleaming under the red light, and its antenna tail swaying like it was alive. Lyra pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her eyes fixed on the mechanical animal. The glowing red sensors on its head made her think of the hunting beasts from her homeworld stories. Beasts that could smell fear and attack without warning. The merchants muttered that humans trained machines to hunt and destroy. The human stopped in the center of the street, his head turning slowly, as if searching for something or someone. Then his visor lifted with a faint hiss, and for the first time Lyra saw his face. His skin was tanned and weathered from travel, and his eyes were warm and calm. The corners of his mouth lifted into a small, gentle smile. He crouched down so that he was closer to her height, the mechanical dog sitting quietly beside him. His voice was low and steady when he spoke. "He won't hurt you," he said, pointing to the machine. "I promise," he added. Lyra froze, unsure whether to believe him. Her heart pounded in her chest and her hands trembled more. She could not understand why this human was speaking so softly when every story she had heard told her that humans were dangerous and cruel. Daniel, as the human was called, kept his gaze gentle and patient. He reached into a pouch at his side and took out a small piece of dried fruit, holding it out to her in an open hand. The merchants nearby stopped what they were doing to watch. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others muttered that the human was tricking the girl. Lyra glanced at the fruit, but did not move. Her mind was filled with flashes of memory from her past. She saw soldiers in strange armor storming through her village, saw fire and smoke, and heard screams. In those memories, the faces of the soldiers were hidden behind glass helmets, just like this man had worn. She swallowed hard and whispered in a voice so soft that only he could hear. "Why are you here?" she asked. "What do you want from me?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "I am looking for someone," he said. "But I cannot leave you here alone." His words confused her even more. Why would a human care if she was alone? The mechanical dog tilted its head and took a small step toward her, its antenna tail giving a slow wag. Lyra flinched and almost ran, but something in the man's calm eyes kept her in place. The moment was broken by a loud metallic crash from the far end of the market. The sound echoed between the tall metal buildings and made several people scream. Shouts rose from the crowd as merchants hurried to close their stalls. Daniel stood quickly, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the noise. Through the shifting crowd, Lyra saw them. A group of armored alien guards marching in formation. Their armor was black, with glowing blue lines running across the plates. Their helmets covered their faces entirely. The leader carried a long spear-like weapon that sparked at the tip. Daniel's hand moved slightly toward his belt where a strange tool hung. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. She knew those guards. She knew what they did to people like her. She backed away until her shoulder touched the stall behind her. Her breath came quick and shallow. Daniel glanced at her, and his expression changed. In that moment he seemed to understand that she was the one the guards were searching for. Lyra's voice shook as she whispered, "They are after me. Please, do not let them take me." Daniel's eyes hardened, and he stepped slightly in front of her. The leader of the guards shouted something in his own language, the sound harsh and commanding. Even without understanding the words, Daniel could tell they were demanding the girl. "They say she is wanted for theft and for betraying their council," a merchant whispered nearby. Daniel shook his head and answered firmly, "She is with me now." The leader's body stiffened. "Then you are our enemy, to human," the guard said in broken trade language. The two sides stared at each other across the market street. The air seemed to grow heavier. Lyra's hands clutched the back of Daniel's suit, as if holding on to the only safe thing in the world. The mechanical dog stood ready, sensors glowing brighter. The guards shifted their weapons into attack position. Daniel slowly raised his empty hand as if to calm them, but his other hand hovered close to the tool at his belt. Every muscle in his body was ready. Lyra could feel the tension through his stance. She did not know what would happen next, but she knew one thing. The human had not moved away from her, not even a step, and in that small truth she felt the first spark of trust. The marketplace was silent, except for the hum of the guards' weapons and the quiet mechanical breathing of the dog. And then the leader took a single step forward, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The guards stood in a tight line there, black armor shining under the red sky, and their blue lights casting a cold glow on the ground. The leader held his weapon steady, and his voice was sharp as he repeated his demand for the girl. Daniel did not move away from Lyra, and his eyes stayed locked on the guards. The marketplace was frozen with fear. Merchants hiding behind their stalls, and customers slipping quietly into side streets. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the mechanical dog, and the faint crackle from the guards' weapons. Lyra's heart beat so hard that she thought the guards could hear it. Her eyes darted from the leader's weapon to the human standing in front of her. She had no reason to believe he could protect her, yet some part of her refused to run without him. Daniel's hand stayed near the strange tool at his belt, but he kept his voice calm. "You have the wrong person," he said slowly. The leader tilted his head, as if confused by the words, then stepped closer. His voice carried a tone of cold authority. "She is marked," he said, in broken trade language. "She belongs to the council." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She knew what it meant to be marked. She could still remember the rough hands that had placed the tiny glowing brand on her arm. The same brand that was now hidden under the sleeve of her simple tunic. It marked her as a fugitive, someone who had fled the service of the council, without permission. The truth was, she had not stolen anything. She had only run away to escape the endless labor and the cruelty. But she knew the guards would never care about the truth. Daniel noticed her shrinking back. He also noticed the way the leader's eyes flicked toward her sleeve. Without warning, he stepped slightly to the side and pulled Lyra forward, so she was standing beside him. He spoke loud enough for all to hear. "If you want her, you will have to go through me." A ripple of shock moved through the watching merchants. No one had ever seen a human willingly stand against the council guards. The leader of the guards raised his weapon higher and barked something in his own language. The guards behind him tightened their grip and shifted into attack stance. The mechanical dog let out a low synthetic growl, and its antenna tail went stiff. Daniel's eyes moved quickly over the street, searching for a path of escape. He could see the guards were blocking the main route out of the market. The alleys on either side were narrow and filled with crates and barrels. Lyra felt her body shaking. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Daniel did not look at her when he answered. "Because I know what it is like to be hunted." His voice was steady, but there was something heavy in his tone. Something that made Lyra wonder what kind of past this human carried. The leader took another step forward and raised his hand in a signal. Two guards began to move around the sides, trying to trap Daniel and Lyra in the middle. The crowd pressed back even farther, leaving a wide open space around them. Daniel knew they had only moments before the trap closed. He bent slightly and whispered to Lyra, "When I move, stay behind me and do not let go." She nodded quickly, though her hands felt weak. Daniel reached down and tapped a command on his wrist device. The mechanical dog suddenly emitted a sharp, high-pitched sound that made the guards flinch and grab at their helmets. The sound seemed to cut straight through the air, like a blade. Daniel seized the moment, grabbing Lyra's wrist and pulling her toward the nearest side alley. They ran between the stalls, knocking over baskets of fruit and piles of cloth as they went. Behind them, the guards shouted in anger. The narrow alley twisted and turned, steam rising from vents in the walls. The ground was slick with moisture, and strange plant roots pushed through the cracks. Daniel kept his grip tight on Lyra's wrist, pulling her forward whenever she stumbled. The sound of heavy boots echoed close behind. Lyra's lungs burned as she tried to keep up. "We cannot outrun them," she gasped. Daniel glanced over his shoulder and shook his head. "We do not have to outrun them, we just need to lose them." They darted down another turn and found themselves in a darker passage, lit only by faint blue strips along the walls. The mechanical dog moved ahead of them, scanning for danger. Eyes adjusted slowly to the gloom, and she saw that the passage ended in a broken wall that opened into a storage yard. Piles of old machinery and abandoned vehicles filled the space. Daniel led her through the maze of rusted metal until they reached the far side, where another narrow street began. The noise of the guards' boots grew fainter. Daniel stopped in the shadow of a large cargo container and listened. He could hear the guards splitting up, their voices bouncing off the walls. Lyra pressed her back against the container, her chest rising and falling fast. She looked at Daniel and saw no fear in his face, only focus. He checked the small screen on his wrist device and frowned. "We cannot stay here," he said. "They will search every corner of this district. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "Where will we go?" Daniel looked toward the distant skyline, where the tall spires of the shipyard rose into the red sky. "Somewhere safe," he said. His words were simple, but carried a weight that made her believe him just enough to take the next step. Somewhere deep inside, she began to wonder if maybe this human really meant it when he said he would not let anyone hurt her. With the noise of the guards fading behind them, Daniel started walking quickly toward the shipyard. Lyra followed close behind. The mechanical dog trotting silently at her side no longer seemed so frightening, but she still kept her eyes on it, unsure what it might do. The air grew cooler as they left the crowded market streets. The red glow of the sky dimmed as tall buildings cast long shadows. Each step took them farther from the danger of the market, but closer to something unknown. Lyra did not know what waited ahead, but she knew the human was not letting go of her hand. And for now, that was enough. The streets beyond the market were quieter, but the air was heavy with tension. Daniel kept a steady pace as he led Lyra through narrow lanes that twisted between tall buildings made of dull metal. The sound of the mechanical dog's steps clicked softly on the ground and echoed off the walls. Lyra glanced over her shoulder more than once, always expecting to see the black armored guards rushing after them. Her mind kept replaying the moment in the market when the leader had looked straight at her, the memory making her heart race all over again. Daniel's eyes moved constantly, scanning doorways and rooftops as they went. He had traveled through many dangerous cities before, and he knew the signs when trouble was closing in the distance. He could hear the faint hum of engines, too steady to be random street traffic. He recognized the sound of patrol skimmers, their engines tuned to a pitch meant to intimidate. Lyra heard it too, and her steps faltered. Daniel gave her hand a small pull and said quietly, "Keep moving. They are close." They turned into a wider street, lined with shuttered shops. Strange glowing signs flickered weakly above the closed doors. The air smelled of metal and smoke. From somewhere nearby came the hiss of steam escaping from a vent. The mechanical dog paused for a second, its sensors glowing brighter as it turned its head toward the sound of approaching engines. Daniel knew they were running out of time. He spotted a narrow service passage between two buildings and guided Lyra toward it. Inside the passage, the light dimmed until it was almost dark. Only the faint blue glow from the dog's sensors lit their way. Lyra tried to stay quiet, but every drip of water and every creak of metal made her jump. Daniel moved quickly, but carefully. He knew that if they made too much noise, they could draw attention. Behind them, the sound of engines grew louder, then stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Daniel pulled Lyra to a halt and pressed his back against the wall. He listened intently. Somewhere close by, heavy boots landed on the metal. Street voices spoke in the harsh tone of the guards. The words were not clear, but the intent was. They were searching. A shadow passed over the entrance to the passage. Lyra held her breath. Her fingers gripped Daniel's arm as she pressed herself against the wall, trying to become invisible. The mechanical dog crouched low and its antenna tail stiffened. Daniel tapped its sides softly, a silent signal to stay still. The guard's footsteps moved past the entrance and faded down the street. Daniel waited several more seconds before giving a small nod and moving forward again. They reached the end of the passage and stepped out into another street. This one was busier, with small alien vendors setting up for the evening trade. The noise of voices and the smell of cooking food filled the air. Daniel blended them into the crowd as best he could, keeping Lyra close beside him. He could feel her tense with every loud noise, but she stayed with him. From across the street, a large display screen showed a grainy image of her face, with strange alien writing beneath it. Lyra froze when she saw it. Daniel glanced at the screen, then pulled the hood of his jacket up over her head. "Do not look back," he said softly. She lowered her gaze and walked faster. They passed a group of alien workers carrying crates. One of them glanced at Lyra with suspicion. Daniel steered her toward a side street before the man could say anything. The side street led toward the industrial district, where the tall towers of the shipyard could be seen in the distance. The air grew colder, and the sounds of heavy machinery clanged through the air. Lyra had never been this far from the market before. Halfway down the street, Daniel suddenly stopped. Ahead of them at the corner stood two guards, their armor reflecting the pale light of the street lamps. The guards were talking, but their eyes kept scanning the street. Daniel quickly turned and led Lyra into a doorway. The door was unlocked, and they slipped inside. The room was dark and smelled of oil and rust. Old tools and broken parts were scattered across the floor. Daniel closed the door softly and moved to the dusty window. He watched the guards for several seconds, until they turned and began walking the other way. Lyra's voice was barely more than a whisper. They are everywhere. Daniel nodded. Yes, and they will not stop until they find you. She swallowed hard. Why me? Why not someone else? Daniel looked at her for a moment, then said, because you ran from them. And people who run are dangerous to those who want control. His words made her feel even colder. She thought about the brand hidden under her sleeve and how it had marked her life forever. The mechanical dog moved toward a side door and let out a soft electronic chirp. Daniel followed it and found a narrow back alley that led away from the main street. They moved through it quickly. The walls closing in on either side. The air was damp and smelled faintly of chemicals. At the far end, the alley opened onto a bridge that stretched over a dark canal. The water below was still and black. Lyra could see the reflection of the glowing sky in it. As they crossed the bridge, Daniel glanced down the length of the canal and saw a movement. A small patrol skimmer was drifting silently toward them, its blue lights scanning the water and the bridge. They had no time to turn back. Daniel pulled Lyra to the side of the bridge and crouched behind a stack of metal crates. The skimmer moved slowly past them, the hum of its engine vibrating through the metal. Lyra held her breath until it was gone. When they reached the far side of the bridge, Daniel finally allowed them to slow down. In the distance, the shipyard towers were closer now, glowing faintly against the dark horizon. Daniel looked at them, and then at Lyra. If we can get there, we have a chance, he said. She nodded, though she did not know what kind of chance he meant. For now she only knew that the danger was still behind them, and perhaps even ahead. But she would follow him. Anyway. The towers of the shipyard loomed larger with every step, but Daniel knew the closer they got, the more danger they would face. The guards would not give up, and the patrols would only grow tighter around the area. The shipyard was a place of strict control, and strangers wandering too close would be questioned or worse. Lyra stayed close to him, her small steps quick to keep pace. The mechanical dog walked silently at her side, scanning the shadows with its glowing sensors. Daniel led them into a narrow lane that curved between two warehouses. The walls were streaked with rust and the air smelled of fuel and old metal. In the distance came the rumble of heavy cargo movers rolling across the ground. He stopped near a side door and checked it quickly. It was locked, but the metal was old and weak. He pressed a small device against the lock and it gave a faint click. The door creaked open just enough for them to slip inside. The interior was dim and filled with stacks of crates wrapped in plastic sheeting. The air was cooler here and carried the faint hum of machines working somewhere deeper inside. Daniel moved quickly between the rows of crates, keeping his head low. Lyra followed closely, her eyes wide, as she tried to take in the strange place. Every shadow looked like it could hide an enemy. Every sound seemed too loud in the stillness. They reached the far end of the warehouse, where a large metal shutter was half open. Beyond it, Daniel could see the edge of the shipyard itself. The ground was marked with lines and symbols, and huge cranes reached into the sky like giant arms. Cargo ships sat in rows, their hulls covered in grease and dust. Workers in heavy suits moved about loading and unloading supplies. Daniel crouched low and motioned for Lyra to do the same. They waited until a group of workers passed by before slipping out. The noise of the shipyard was overwhelming compared to the silence of the warehouse. Engines roared, and machines clanged as they moved massive containers. The smell of oil and ozone filled the air. Daniel kept his head down and tried to blend them into the movement around them. Lyra stayed close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. Her eyes darted from one massive machine to the next as they moved between them. They were halfway across the yard when the mechanical dog gave a sharp electronic chirp. Daniel's head snapped up and he followed its gaze. A patrol of guards had entered the yard from the far side. Their black armor caught the light and their weapons were ready. Daniel grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward a line of cargo containers. The sound of boots hitting metal echoed across the yard as the guards began moving faster. Daniel's mind raced as he looked for a way out. He spotted an older cargo shuttle at the edge of the yard. Its hull was scratched and dented, but it was powered up. Workers were loading supplies into it with slow mechanical loaders. If they could reach it before the guards closed in, they might be able to use it to get away. He pulled Lyra forward, weaving between the containers. The mechanical dog ran ahead, scanning for any movement. They were only a few steps from the shuttle when a shout rang out. The leader of the guards had seen them. His voice carried across the yard as he ordered his men to surround the shuttle. Daniel cursed under his breath and pushed Lyra behind a large crate. The guards were closing in from two sides. The only open path was through the line of mechanical loaders. Daniel glanced at them and saw a risky chance. He tapped a command into his wrist device, and the mechanical dog sprinted toward the nearest loader. It jumped onto the control platform and sent a short burst of signal into the machine. The loader lurched to the side, blocking the path of two guards. Daniel grabbed Lyra's hand and ran for the gap. They dashed between moving machinery as shouts rose behind them. Sparks flew as one of the loaders struck a stack of metal pipes, sending them clattering across the ground. They reached the shuttle's open cargo ramp just as a worker turned to see them. His eyes widened, but before he could speak, Daniel pushed past him, pulling Lyra along. The mechanical dog bounded up the ramp, and Daniel hit the control to start closing it. The worker shouted something in protest, but Daniel ignored him. The guards were almost at the ramp when the shuttle's engines roared to life. The closing ramp cut off the guards' view, and the roar of the engines drowned out their voices. Daniel moved quickly to the cockpit, where a startled pilot turned in his seat. The pilot reached for an alarm switch, but Daniel pressed a small device against the console, sending a short pulse of light through the controls. The pilot slumped unconscious. Daniel slid into the seat and began working the controls. The shuttle trembled as it lifted from the ground. Lyra stood in the doorway to the cockpit, gripping the frame for balance. Her eyes were wide as she watched the ground drop away. The mechanical dog sat at her feet, its senses dimming now that the danger below was fading. Daniel kept his eyes on the horizon, steering the shuttle toward the darker side of the city. He knew the guards would have flyers ready to follow them, and their escape was far from over. Through the cockpit window, Lyra could see the lights of the city stretching out beneath them. Somewhere far behind, the black armored guards were regrouping. Somewhere ahead lay only uncertainty. She stepped closer to Daniel and said in a small voice, "Where will we go now?" He glanced at her briefly, and then back to the controls. "Somewhere they cannot follow," he said. His voice was calm, but the grip on the controls was tight. The shuttle climbed higher, leaving the shipyard far behind. For a moment, there was only the sound of the engines and the steady hum of the systems. But Daniel knew the quiet would not last. The air in the ship felt heavy as Kira sat in the small cabin given to her. She could still hear the low hum of the engines as they traveled through space. It was strange to her how quiet it felt inside. Compared to the chaotic sounds outside in space, Ethan had told her this was normal, but it still made her feel uneasy. She kept glancing at the metal door, as if expecting it to open any moment. The alien girl had never been inside a human ship before, and every part of it felt strange, and knew her mind was full of questions, but she was afraid to ask. Ethan had been kind, but she still did not fully trust him. Her people had always told stories about humans. Some were good and some were bad. She did not know which ones were true. Her heart told her Ethan was different, but fear still held her tight. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to feel safe. Ethan stood outside the cabin door, talking quietly with his crew. He knew Kira was scared, and he did not want to rush her. The mission was not just about helping her, it was about gaining her trust and making sure she felt safe. One wrong move, and she might never believe him again. He glanced toward the closed door and sighed. The crew could see the weight on his face. They had never seen Ethan so careful before. Hours passed, and finally Ethan knocked on the door. Kira jumped a little at the sound, but she did not answer right away. He waited patiently, and then spoke in a soft voice. "Kira, I want to show you something." There was silence for a moment, before she slowly replied, asking what it was. Ethan said it was better to see it with her own eyes. Curiosity mixed with fear, as she stood and walked to the door. When it opened, she saw Ethan holding a small device, glowing faintly. "Blue, this is a translator." Ethan explained, "It will help you understand us, and help us understand you." Kira hesitated, but took it in her hands. It was lighter than she expected. She turned it over, looking at the strange lines and lights on its surface. Ethan told her to place it near her ear. As soon as she did, the device activated, and a soft chime filled the air. She could now hear his words more clearly, and even the crew's quiet whispers made sense. For the first time she felt a small bridge forming between them. Ethan smiled when he saw her reaction. He said they were going to a safe place, but they needed her help. Kira frowned, asking why they would need her help when she knew so little about humans. Ethan explained that this journey was not only about humans helping her, it was about her helping them understand her people too. He said trust went both ways. Kira stayed quiet, thinking about his words. The ship entered a darker part of space where stars seemed fewer. Ethan pointed at the viewing window and told her to look far away. A faint light shimmered in the darkness. "That is where we are going," he said. "It is a station where humans and aliens meet in peace." Kira felt her heart beat faster. She had heard rumors of such places, but never believed they were real. She asked Ethan if her people were there. He told her that was something she would have to see for herself. Fast, they approached the station. The sight made her gasp. It was larger than any ship she had seen before, with bright lights covering its surface. Small ships moved in and out, like bees returning to a hive. Her fear was slowly mixing with wonder. Ethan watched her face and knew this moment was important. He told her they would be meeting others who might not trust as easily as she did, but he promised to be by her side the whole time. When the ship docked, the crew prepared to step out. Kira hesitated at the door. This was her choice now. She could step into the unknown with Ethan, or stay where fear kept her safe. But alone, Ethan held out his hand, not forcing her but waiting. The hum of the station beyond the door seemed to call her forward. Kira took a deep breath. Her small hand slowly reached out and touched his. Ethan's smile was calm and warm. Together they stepped into the light of the station, ready to face whatever awaited them. Next, the station was alive with sound and color as Ethan and Kira stepped onto the smooth metal floor. Strange smells filled the air, mixing sweet spices with sharp metallic scents. The walls curved high above them, glowing with soft lights. Like stars trapped inside glass, crowds of different species moved around them, speaking in many voices and languages. Some looked at Ethan with respect, while others gave cold glances, but when they saw Kira, many faces turned curious, and some turned suspicious. Kira stayed close to Ethan, her eyes wide, as she took in the strange shapes and colors of the people around them. She had never seen so many kinds of beings in one place. Some were tall and thin with skin like polished stone. Others were short and round with eyes that blinked sideways. She gripped Ethan's sleeve without thinking when a large figure with tusks walked by and grunted in a language she did not know. The translator whispered meaning into her ear, but the words made little sense. It was something about new arrivals and trouble. Ethan guided her toward a quieter hallway where the crowd was thinner. His crew followed, keeping watch on every side. He spoke in a calm voice, telling her they had a meeting with someone who could help them. Kira asked why the people on the station looked at her with such doubt. Ethan paused before saying that not everyone here trusted strangers, especially when danger was near. She frowned, but kept walking beside him, her heart still uneasy. They reached a small chamber with a round table in the center. The walls had faint patterns that pulsed with blue light. A man was already waiting for them, dressed in dark clothing, with a silver badge on his chest. Ethan introduced him as Captain Rourke, one of the station's leaders. Rourke's eyes moved from Ethan to Kira, and then back again. He asked if this was the one Ethan had risked so much to bring here. Ethan nodded. Without hesitation, Rourke leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. He said the station had received warnings of a possible attack from raiders. He believed Kira might have information that could help. Kira's eyes widened in surprise. She shook her head, saying she knew nothing of any attack. Rourke studied her face for a long moment, then asked if she had seen any ships following them. She remembered the dark shapes that had appeared before Ethan found her. She nodded slowly and described the strange symbols painted on their sides. Rourke's expression darkened. He said those were the marks of the Black Fang, a ruthless group that hunted both humans and aliens. If they had seen Kira, then they might follow her here. Kira's chest tightened with fear. Ethan put a hand on her shoulder, telling her she was safe as long as she stayed with them. But inside he knew this had just become far more dangerous than he had planned. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered and a low alarm began to hum through the walls. Rourke touched a small device on his wrist and spoke quickly into it. A voice answered, saying unknown ships had been detected at the edge of the station's sensors. Ethan and his crew exchanged tense looks. Rourke turned to them, saying they had little time to prepare. He told Ethan to get Kira to a secure location while they readied the defenses. They moved quickly through the winding corridors of the station. Kira kept glancing over her shoulder, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on her. The alarm continued to hum. Like a warning heartbeat, they reached a narrow passage, lit only by strips of red light. Ethan stopped for a moment, listening. There was a faint sound of footsteps that did not belong to their group. He signaled for silence, and the crew spread out to watch both ends of the passage. Shadow moved at the far end. It grew larger, until a figure stepped into the red light. It was not a human, and not a species. Kira recognized, tall and wrapped in dark armor. The figure stood without speaking. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. Ethan called out, asking what they wanted. The figure's voice came through deep and sharp, saying they had come for the girl. Kira's breath caught in her throat. Ethan stepped in front of her, his voice firm, saying they would have to go through him first. The figure tilted its head, as if considering the challenge. Then it stepped back into the shadows, and was gone. Ethan wasted no time. Leading Kira deeper into the station, they reached a secure chamber sealed with heavy doors. Inside, the room was quiet, except for the hum of machines. Ethan told her to stay there and trust him. He promised again that no one would hurt her. Kira wanted to believe him, but the glowing eyes of the armored figure stayed in her mind. Somewhere far beyond the walls of the station, dark shapes moved closer. The Black Fang had found them, and Kira realized the danger was only beginning. The hum of the secure room was steady, but Kira could not feel safe. Her hands trembled as she sat on the cold bench, listening to the faint alarms echoing from far away. Ethan stood by the door, speaking in low tones to his crew through a small device on his wrist there. Words were sharp and quick about defense lines and incoming ships. He turned to her and told her the station was under attack. His voice was calm, but his eyes held a weight that made her chest feel heavy. Kira asked why the Black Fang wanted her so much. Ethan hesitated before saying they believed she had something that could lead them to an ancient power hidden somewhere in the galaxy. She shook her head, saying she knew of no such thing. Ethan explained that sometimes knowledge could be hidden in the mind without the person even knowing. Her memories from the time before he found her might hold a clue. Kira felt fear twist inside her. If that was true, then she was not only in danger, but she might bring danger to everyone around. As suddenly the heavy door shook as a loud thud echoed through the chamber. Kira jumped while Ethan raised his weapon and signaled to his crew. The sound came again, this time with a screech of metal bending under force. The lights in the room flickered and turned red. A voice spoke from beyond the door, deep and cold, saying they knew the girl was inside. Kira's heart pounded. She saw shadows moving under the door as if dark smoke was alive and reaching for them. Ethan moved to stand directly between her and the door. He told her that no matter what happened, she must run if he gave the signal. She wanted to argue, but his eyes stopped her. The door burst inward with a sound like breaking stone. Figures in black armor poured into the room, their eyes glowing faintly in the red light. They moved with silent purpose, their weapons raised. Ethan's crew opened fire, and the chamber filled with flashes of light and the smell of burning metal. Kira pressed herself against the far wall, watching the fight unfold. One of the armored figures pushed through the chaos, heading straight for her. Its movements were fast and precise, ignoring the battle around it. Ethan saw it and shouted her name. He leaped forward, firing at the figure, but its armor deflected the blasts. It reached for her with a clawed hand, and she felt its cold shadow fall over her. Something inside her stirred, a heat rising in her chest. Without thinking, she raised her hand, and a burst of blinding light shot from her palm. Figure staggered back with a hiss of pain. Its armor smoked where the light had touched it. The entire room froze for a heartbeat as all eyes turned to her. Kira stared at her hand in shock. She had not known she could do that. Ethan shouted for them to move, and the fight erupted again. The attackers seemed more determined now. They shouted to each other in their strange language, calling her by a name she did not understand. Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the hallway beyond the ruined door. They ran through twisting corridors, lit only by the red emergency lights. The station shook under the force of weapons from outside. Over the comes Rourke's voice, ordered all forces to push the Black Fang back. Ethan led her toward the docking bay where their ship waited, but before they could reach it, another group of armored figures blocked the path. This time there was no place to run. Kira felt the heat in her chest again. Ethan told her to focus on that power and use it. She closed her eyes, trying to find the light inside her. When she opened them, the air around her shimmered. A wave of bright energy burst from her, sending the attackers flying back against the walls. The corridor was silent, except for the distant sounds of battle. Ethan looked at her with awe and told her that whatever she carried inside might be the key to ending the war with the Black Fang. They reached the docking bay and boarded the ship quickly. Rourke's voice came through the comms, saying the station could not hold much longer. Ethan started the engines, and the ship rose from the bay through the viewport. Kira saw the station surrounded by dark ships with glowing marks. The stars beyond seemed far and cold. Ethan pushed the ship forward, breaking through the blockade with the help of Rourke's forces. As the station faded behind them, Kira asked where they were going. Ethan said they needed to find the source of her power before the Black Fang did. He promised her that they would uncover the truth together. She nodded, though her mind was full of questions. She looked down at her hand and wondered what else she could do. The stars stretched into lines as the ship jumped into hyperspace. Somewhere in the dark, the Black Fang still hunted them, but now Kira was no longer just a frightened girl. She was something more, and she was ready to find out what that meant.